Hi, I'm Jacob Bonta, host of Growth and Beyond. After generating millions of dollars in pipeline value for various companies via fundamental marketing principles and leveraging modern technology, we made this show to interview top business leaders and highlight the ways to achieve growth for your business. If you'd like to level up your customer base and let us help you grow, email me at jacob@lowlandscollective.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Growth and Beyond. Today, I'm chatting with Jordan Gall, founder of Rally, a headless checkout software solution for modern brands. Jordan has been living and breathing entrepreneurship since he was 6 years old, when his family immigrated from Israel to start a business in America. During our chat, we cover hot topics like the platform power player Shopify and how they decided to axe Jordan's $100 million product for its own sake, and shifting mindsets from I'm good, so I do it, to being comfortable with doing less and less but gaining more and more. This can be particularly tricky for those of us that have come from a more resourceful background, like Jordan and I both do. Without further ado, here's my conversation with the founder of Rally, Jordan Gall. All right. Hi, Jordan. How's it going? Thanks for coming on the show.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing pretty well. It's a beautiful day out here in Chicagoland, and I have a cold that I'm just going to ignore, run right over, and I'm going to be fine. And That's it. I'm excited for the week.
That's awesome. Love Chicago. Big fan of Chicago. Been there many times. Cool. Well, why don't you take a second to say hi to the audience and share something that you believe to be the biggest myth when it comes to growing a business?
Ooh, okay. So it's good to meet everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan. I'm the CEO and co-founder at a company called Rally, where we offer a composable or headless checkout for e-commerce. And I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, basically my entire adult life. I grew up in an immigrant entrepreneur household. And when you do that, you just kind of default into this. And I've been running software companies for, I guess, about 10 years. And let's see, a myth about business building is that I don't think you need that much advice. I think advice is overrated. I think listening to podcasts with people who tell you what you should do is overrated. I think you got to find your own way, and comparing yourself to other people is actually quite unhealthy. And you can figure it out on your own. And it's good to listen to people, but don't get lost in admiring people too much and making heroes out of them and all these frameworks. And it's got to be product-led growth or lean startup. I don't actually think all that like facade around this thing that we do is necessary. And like the base, straightforward, ask people what they want, give it to them. Don't be shy on pricing. Try to make more money than you spend. Like that always comes back to the fundamental, because that is actually like the base layer. That's the truth. All this other stuff muddies it up. Yeah,
I totally agree. I mean, it's jarring. Like I'm a big YouTube connoisseur. I love, it's like my channel of choice, but if I just have like 5 minutes or whatever, It is dizzying how many content creator, whatever you want to call them, have different strategies, different little tactical things that you can do to grow your business, become a billionaire.
You're one funnel away.
Yeah, it's insane. It's just so jarring, and it to a new founder or business owner, entrepreneur, it can be paralyzing. Really,
that's the thing, that it's not that it can actually have a bad outcome. And it can lead you toward the wrong things. I'm guilty of all of it. I remember at some point I went toward an advertising-based business, and it was like I'll just build it and get users and raise money for it. And I don't know why I did that. It's just that's what I was like marinating in the content that I was consuming, and I thought that was normal. Yeah. And then that business didn't work, and I went back to fundamentals, and the next business worked a lot better. And then I listened to too many podcasts, and then I started getting like, I'm a generally envious person by nature. When I hear about other people's success, I actually have a hard time being happy for them, because I can't help it. You know, that's just, and I understand it about my DNA. So at some point I just stopped listening, and I found myself again. And if I'm being totally honest, it took success of at least some degree before I just took it easy on myself and said, you know what, maybe I actually know what I'm doing and I can stop being so hard on myself. And I wish I could have done that before like the objective success metrics were there. But at least for me, that's what it took. But at least it like freed me.
I do have a question about like, do you mind walking us through like your journey to becoming a co-founder / CEO and how you got started in your industry specifically? And
Sure.
something that you mentioned a few minutes ago, you said you come from an immigrant entrepreneur background. Do you mind maybe, I guess, starting with that?
Yeah. So my parents brought us over from Israel when I was 6. And my dad started his own business. And at age 12, 13, I basically understood the family's financial situation. Right. Here's what we have coming in. Here's what we have going out. The billing happens in a few months. So I started thinking that way from a very young age. And in many ways that's really helped me in terms of financial planning when running a business, because I have a general sense on the accounting and finance side. Right. So I don't need to look at the numbers, and I'm not like veering too far off of reality, even if I'm not looking at the numbers every day. So it's funny because I say that. And then, of course, I went to college. I went to University of Michigan. The first thing I did out of school was I went right into investment banking, like an absolute sheep idiot, because I was so used to competing with my peers, and all my smart peers, that's what they were doing. So that's what I did too. And of course, I hated it, obviously. And I left after a year, and then I started my entrepreneurial journey. And I did a few different businesses. And when I finally went online, that was an e-commerce company. So the previous thing that I mentioned, that advertising based, was like a politics based website. And that didn't work at all. And I wasted a year on it. It didn't work at all. So I dropped it. And at that point in time, my older brother had started an e-commerce company. He was kind of like losing interest in it. I was like, look, I got nothing to lose. Would you mind if I just took over the e-commerce company and see what we can do? So I basically grabbed that thing that he already had up and running. And the first thing I did, which is it's very interesting that this is where it all started, because it relates directly to what we're doing now, 10 years later with Rally. The first thing I did in the e-commerce business is I moved the sites off of Yahoo stores and I moved it to Volusion. I am dating myself saying that, but that was how it went. Okay. So Yahoo stores was like, that's actually Paul Graham's business that he made his money on. Yahoo bought Via Web or whatever it was. I think I have that right. So the defining characteristic of Yahoo stores was that they were distributed through like service providers, agencies. And what that really meant was that you as the merchant had very little control. You would have to go to your developer, your agency, to make any changes. And that seemed preposterous to me online, because I want to like experiment. I want to put up a new product. I want to change the price. So when we moved from Yahoo to Volusion, we finally had control over the store. And we had control over the store. Then we started experimenting. And that's when I went up the learning curve around conversion optimization and got really into e-commerce. And we were selling, we were drop shipping for the most part, holding inventory of certain products that were best sellers. Mm-hmm. And that's what started me into e-commerce. And it did pretty well. It did like $5,000 the first month, and then 10, and then 20, and then 50, and then 80. So it grew quickly.
Whoa.
Right. This is back in the day when this is pre-Facebook advertising. This is Google AdWords.
Okay.
And once you get that thing working, you can turn it on.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that top of the funnel lever was there with Google AdWords. And once you optimize the funnel from after the click that you could reliably convert in a profitable way, then you just open the spigot, right? Then you just go. The problem is that we realized that our future was not looking good in an Amazon world, because we were selling products that were available elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And then you're competing on price and you're competing on service. It's like a race to the bottom. And then Amazon's looming and growing. So we knew we either had to create our own brand or sell the business. And we just kind of called it a day. We sold the business, and that was the first exit. And then I got into software for e-commerce merchants.
Interesting.
Yep. So I was the merchant. I was the customer. And then I launched software for the customer that I was very familiar with because I was just that person. So I had everything fresh in my mind on what would you pay for? What ROI are you looking for it? What are your problems? What are you trying to solve? What solutions are bad? And so on.
Yeah. Okay. So whenever you got into software after you sold that first company that you created, were there any like key moments or experiences that helped shape your sort of leadership style and approach to running whatever your first e-commerce or software was?
Yeah. So at the e-commerce company, I can think of two lessons. The first lesson was that conversion optimization and a learning curve around that and an understanding of how people interact with websites, that can make a very tangible difference in your business is like a fascinating breakthrough. Like, so if I move this button from here to there, and I take the stars on the reviews and I put them up in the product description at the very top instead of just at the bottom where you scroll, that like changes your business.
Exactly.
Right. So that is fascinating because you're like, oh my God, I'm in control. I can make a difference. So I think that is one lesson that got me really into like product and interactions on the web and so on. The other lesson was more painful. One of the key reasons we sold the business is because it was relatively painful to manage all the customer support. And toward the very end, when we were saying, oh my God, if we have to scale this to be so big in order to make real money, or we have to create our own brand, one of the key factors in making the decision to sell and move on was the customer support pain. And right at the very end, we were in the process of outsourcing it. And then we had signed with the buyer to sell the company. And then like the same week we made the switch. And when we made the switch to the outsourced customer support, when I tell you nothing changed, I mean, nothing. The only thing that changed was all the pain just went away. And then everything was quiet. And we were like, oh my goodness, that assumption that we have to do that it can't be outsourced was so wrong that we reconsidered backing out of the deal because it was like, well, this business is a lot better if you take away all the pain. We ended up going through and selling it, but it was kind of like a blatant, painful lesson around, are you sure that assumption is right? Because you had that assumption real wrong. So that was a humbling experience.
That's interesting that you bring that up because it just triggered a thought in my own head. Like, I wonder how many founders think that they or maybe feel guilty if they figure out how to remove all the pain. You know what I mean? Because
yes,
I think with pain equals like the American sort of traditional, you're working for your money. And then without that, like if you were to remove it completely, would you feel bad about it? You know what I mean?
Yes, that's a interesting topic, right? So E-Myth, that like classic book, it talks a lot about like this entrepreneurial curse around wanting to do the work yourself or saying, hey, I'm good at that, therefore I do it. I definitely had some of that from like growing up in a family business. So that was a necessary transition in mindset to get to a point where you're running a company and everyone's doing all the work. And then you're just sitting at the top role like, this is odd. I get paid the most. I have the most upside and I do the least work and I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And I shouldn't feel guilty about it. That's an interesting transition to make from owner of a business to like manager, right? Operator versus manager. It's actually pretty complicated from a psyche point of view. Yep.
Yeah, that's something back to like the content creators on YouTube or whatever. And apologies for I keep turning over to that area, but like that's something they don't really touch on, like the psychology behind making that shift. Like usually you hear about how do you do it? Like what's the tactic in order to hire people to take over your position? But no one really talks about what it means to literally like mentally shift there,
Yeah. It's I sometimes I have this conversation with like founder friends, and I think people who grew up wealthy have a distinct advantage in the psychology of running a business because they usually grew up around an environment that the people involved didn't do all the work. And that's a huge advantage when operating a business, because you default to, well, I'm just going to hire someone to do that. I'm not going to do that myself.
Right.
And that's actually the better thing to do for the business's health in many cases. And people who grew up more like resourceful default to, I'm just going to do that myself. And that does not necessarily lead to the right outcomes. So I distinctly did not grow up wealthy. And so I've had to like overcome that psychological aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I did not grow up wealthy either. So
Yeah.
I've not yet had to wrestle that bear, but I'm willing to,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I only did it at my previous company, right? So after selling the e-commerce company, I started a software company called CartHook. And it started off as a little product that was an abandoned cart app that just sent emails to people who started the checkout but didn't complete the purchase. We're all familiar with it now, but back when I started, it was a relatively novel concept. That went okay for a while. It grew some. It got to like 10 and then 15K and 20K a month. Like, not bad. But we then stumbled onto like a bigger idea. And that bigger idea was what the company eventually ended up offering, which was a full checkout solution for Shopify merchants. At that time, Shopify's checkout was extremely rigid. It was 3 pages when most of the purchases were happening on desktop, or 1 page is better. And they had these few missing features that I knew people in the market wanted. So we launched a 1-page customizable checkout for Shopify with post-purchase offers. And that's what the market wanted right then. And it hit bing, like right on the button at just the right time, and grew like crazy. And that is what forced me into, well, I can't do everything myself. I can't do anything, actually. I can barely hang on. And that like forced me to go up that learning curve of, oh, I need to hire someone for success. I hire someone for support, hire someone for marketing, hire someone to do demos, hire someone to do product. And it was like, you don't have a choice. You can't do all this work yourself. And at least that was like, I don't know if I would have gone over that hump in quite the same way unless I was just absolutely forced to.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was that big pivot moment. Was that still CartHook, or is that what inspired you to start Rally? And that's what Rally is?
No, so it was still CartHook, and we got ourselves into a tricky situation where we were managing 2 products, right? So it's like an 8-person bootstrapped software company with like $225,000 from friends and family, running 2 products, and it was risky because that's too much to manage, but it was still the right thing to do. And when the checkout product overtook the abandoned cart product, and it was clear that was the future of the company, we eventually just sunset the abandoned cart app and focused on the one checkout app. So it basically went from an abandoned cart company to a checkout company. And that company did really well. It did 100 million in processing the first year, 200 million the next year, then 400, then 800. And in total, it processed $2.8 billion in GMV. Amazing. Right, we got the 6 million ARR, doubling every year, super profitable, like 18-person company. It was so much fun. And then Shopify killed it.
Why?
Because we were taking $100 million a month off of their platform and running it through our checkout. And while I believe it's a merchant's business and they can decide to do whatever the hell they want with their business, Shopify disagrees and thinks it's their platform and they get to decide what merchants can and can't do on that platform. And there's another lesson for you. If you play platform games, you win platform prizes. That's how that goes. The internet today is governed and ruled by these very large platforms. And unfortunately, entrepreneurs end up building on those platforms out of very good reason, because that's where all the customers are and that's where you can get distribution. And the tough part is sometimes you build the wrong thing at the wrong time for the wrong platform, and you get nuked. And that's how that goes. I don't like it. I wish it was different. I think Web3 can change it, but for right now, that's the reality.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do want to circle back to the Web3 thing you just mentioned, but yeah, I think that's one of the biggest the biggest pros of obviously going on a platform like Shopify is you've got everything right there ready to go. So the speed is incredible. But yeah, I think that's the biggest risk is like you're literally putting all of your eggs in someone else's basket that they have full control over. Like
That's right. So I happen to have a particularly rough experience of it where, the thing ran into a wall. Other people have different versions of it. Some businesses are only impacted in their strategy and product decisions and less directly financially, but there's a spectrum of experience. And so what Rally is, my new company, is a lot of the people from CardHook, like the CTO, who's now my co-founder, the VP of product came over, a bunch of the engineers were basically saying, well, we know how to add value doing this. We now want to do it for the rest of the web and not the Shopify ecosystem. And so what Rally does is it offers e-commerce merchants a better checkout experience for their store, whether they're built on a traditional platform like a BigCommerce or a Salesforce or something else, or if they're building in this new headless composable way and using Swell on the back end or commerce tools or something custom. So that's our bet on where e-commerce is going in a more unbundled ecosystem. And we want to play, that checkout payments layer in that ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And sort of digging into that a little bit, how did you approach the initial stages of building and growing Rally really? And what were some of those biggest challenges that you ended up facing?
So the first big challenge was exiting CardHook in a responsible way. So I knew after everything happened with Shopify, I had no interest in playing ball in their arena anymore. I wanted to move on with my career. I didn't want anything to do with Shopify. But I had shareholders and employees. And so doing that the right way at CardHook was very, very important to me, obviously. That was the first big challenge. And then CardHook had some friends and family money, but it got profitable and it didn't go toward venture. And I knew that was a very healthy path to grow a business. And I enjoyed it very much, not, having anyone involved beyond myself and the other managers to decide what was going to happen with the company. But I also knew if we had gotten into the same situation, but we had significant resources and contacts and network behind us, we would have been better off. And so with Rally, I knew that we should raise venture and take a bigger swing. And so the next challenge there was raising a Series seed from VCs, and I had never done that before. So that was a new learning curve for me in figuring out, how to orient a company toward this new version for me, and who to raise money from, and how much to raise, and how it works, and the lingo, and the networking, and the decks, and presentation. So that was like a new challenge for me.
Besides the I guess instance or situation you just mentioned, was there another particularly challenging moment in history of Rally specifically, and how did you end up overcoming that?
So what comes to mind is a challenge actually from CardHook, and then we can talk about what we've been doing at Rally, and in some ways how we've corrected, and in some ways overcorrected on Rally based on that experience. So at CardHook, it sounds pretty cool to launch and then get an overwhelming amount of demand. That's what that's what I go for every time. It's what everyone tries for. It was actually incredibly painful. And that $100 million in processing the first year, again, sounds pretty cool. But in reality, it was one disaster after another because we didn't know how to operate a checkout product. We didn't understand what we had on our hands. We didn't know the nature of the product, the nature of the QA and the deployments and the uptime required. And, we would just make a mistake and it would just cost someone $20,000. I just sent an email out and your thing went down and you just cost me all this money and you ruined my month. And we're like, oh, geez. Okay. So that first year, we really had to figure out what was on our hands. And as a marketing and sales focused founder, to watch people come into the product, get put on a conveyor belt of pain and just get chopped up into pieces and come out of it begging for mercy and churning. To do that for a year straight, even though it was a lot of people, it hurt, man. It was so painful. We then released version 2, and that's when everything clicked and the churn chilled out, and that's when it took off. So that first year was a crazy number of lessons, and it was not much fun. So people are like, oh, we're in hyper growth mode, and isn't that so sad? And in reality, you should actually sympathize. Of course, everyone wants to be there, but it was not that much fun while being in it.
In retrospect, what would you have done differently if you could do it over again, I guess?
I don't know how much we could have done differently. I look now at Rally, and we overcorrected a little bit. We built a new checkout product from scratch, and we built it in anticipation of a similar scenario. And we didn't want to go through that pain again. So we built it rock solid. And that meant we took too long on the product. And it didn't get released out into the wild until too long. And that means our feedback cycle was delayed for a while. And I think overall that hurt us. We would have been better off releasing sooner. And so you can see how one lesson makes perfect sense to follow, but in this scenario, it actually wasn't the right lesson to learn in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are other things like at Kartuk, we had the pricing wrong. We charged $99 a month. And then we got so much demand that we were like, how do we slow down this demand? How do we just talk to fewer people? So we raised the price to $300. And then the demand just stayed exactly the same. We were like, oh, geez, we were completely off. So obviously we were underpricing it. And then we ran like that for like 2 years until we started to realize, hey, this is crazy, the amount of work and stress that we're under and the amount of revenue that we're helping people generate. So we changed the pricing to $500 a month. Plus we required a demo. So like half the people were like, no, you can't come in, go to our competitor that's cheaper because you're not right for us. And people lost their minds. And then we also added a 50 basis point like transaction fee, and people like lost their minds. But then we like gave everyone 6 months, and then the pricing change went into effect in January of 2020. And then COVID hits 2 months later. And when I tell you the company doubled from 200K a month to 400K a month, like within 3 months, boom. So we were wrong again. We were like, and pricing, that lever is so powerful. So it was like a series of mistakes upon mistakes that just kept leading to success, and then failure here, and more success here, more failure here. It was amazing. It was great.
Yeah, pricing, man. Pricing is like one of the biggest things I think I've seen a lot of companies get wrong. And back to if you were raised wealthy or raised more of like a can-do, gotta do it all type of person, I wonder if that has anything to do with underpricing your product, because I would say like 90% of at least software companies get pricing wrong. If they're like, coming from your perspective, what do you think people can do to at least try to get a good idea as quick as possible around pricing?
So going in with the assumption that you have it wrong is step one. Yeah. And I hear you. It's so interesting too, because it's so easy from the outside to criticize pricing decisions. And then when it comes time for you to decide your own pricing, you just start negotiating against yourself. It's like default mode. And we have these conversations, a few like founder friends and I, and we like bring them out publicly, like into the group, because we know if you keep that to yourself, you have that conversation with yourself, you will negotiate against yourself and put yourself in a bad spot. And if you put it out there, people will be like, but look at what this person's paying, and look at this competitor, and look at how much value they're getting. So it's easier from the outside to do that. So the willingness to change, also very, very important, and much harder to actually do than say. Right. To just like walk in one day to the office and be like, we're now $99 a month instead of $49. And just have the kind of guts to do that, as opposed to all the stuff that people usually put around it. Like, well, we're going to send an email. We have to notify. What if someone signs up today, but then their pricing changes by the time their free trials over, like, and all these other things you can come up with. So the willingness to actually make those changes is really important. And at least the way I've always approached this stuff is if you can find the right value metric, meaning like what is your pricing based on? For me, that's where I start everything. If you don't have the right metric that you're pricing according to, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So is it new revenue? Is it number of people? Is it like number of projects? If you get that wrong, you're in a world of pain.
And when you say pricing, like price, do you mean like pricing in order to get the effect that you want from it? You know what I mean? Rather than like when you were first talking about it, I thought like pricing that you could then pair up with the messaging on the value prop side of things. Do you know what I mean? This is why it's $99 a month, is because it saves you 5 hours.
That's not what immediately comes to mind for me. There's nothing wrong with like including that in the marketing positioning and so on. What I want is a scenario where the company and the customer and the pricing are aligned in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that means let's look at us. We're a checkout company. We want what you want. We want you to process as much money through our checkout as possible. That's what you want to do as a business in e-commerce. You want to sell more products, more revenue. So we want our pricing to go along with that. So we're going to charge you a small percentage of the total amount of payment processed through our checkout. And that means we're aligned. You want the same thing that we want. And I think that's the healthiest approach. Sometimes you get into these weird situations where you're like, it's $19 per person, like per seat. And then you get these weird things. Well, we're the company, but we only have 3 people that actually use it. But we need 8 people that have access to it. But we don't want to pay for 8 people. We just want to give it to 3 people. Then we're going to share our logins. And you start to get out of whack on the incentives and the alignment there. So we want pricing that is like disconnected from time, right? That's what you're trying to do with a product business as opposed to a service business to begin with. So for us, we want to be able to fly. If people are really successful, then we want crazy growth along with them.
I think that's something that a lot of people, they don't even consider it. It's like so important, pricing in general, but that anecdotal evidence that you just provided that's huge, really. So shifting gears a little bit to sort of like acquisition discussion. How did you guys go about acquiring your first customers there at Rally?
So the nature of our business is dependent on e-commerce platforms, at least for now. We can talk about how we're trying to change that in the future because it's not the healthiest place to be. So when we look at an ecosystem, a market for us, let's just say big commerce, right? That is an e-commerce platform that isn't Shopify. Very important for us because we don't want to work with Shopify. So when we look at big commerce, we say to ourselves, okay, how are we going to get distribution in this ecosystem? And so there's an app store, there is the platform, and there are the platform complements, right? Agencies and apps that work with the platform. So we try to look at all of those channels and figure out where is the healthiest place for us to be. Should we go to agencies that are the trusted partners of big commerce merchants? Because the recommendation from that agency down toward that merchant is a great place to be. Do we want to go to the platform directly and try to make a distribution deal with them and offer a rev share and figure out how can we align ourselves? Right, think about big commerce. One of their biggest initiatives, pulling Shopify merchants off, right? Straightforward. Everyone knows that. So if we can go to them and say, thinking about their incentive, and saying what you can do with Rally is you can go to that Shopify merchant and say, if you come over to BigCommerce and use Rally, you'll get a very Shopify-like checkout experience that you're used to, and your shoppers will be recognized when they come back. Right? Our checkout works like Shop Pay, where you go through the checkout once, and the next time you come back to any other Rally checkout, you're recognized, you get a little SMS, and you buy very easily. So BigCommerce doesn't have that. Shopify does. And so maybe we're useful to big commerce in their sales conversations with Shopify merchants. Right. So it's basically that type of a thought process, but with every potential channel and partner. All right. With an agency, Who are the best agency for us? Probably performance agencies that charge a percentage of ad spend, because our product increases revenue with post-purchase offers. So if they can say to their customer, their merchant, and say, hey, for this $20,000 of ad spend, instead of bringing you $50,000, this product can help you bring in $55,000. Aren't I the hero for introducing it to you? Then that means we're aligned with that partner. Right. So it's like that thought process. And then also, how do we take it upon ourselves to just hit the phones and hit the email and be able to bring in our own customers with direct outreach? Right. One's like short term, but not the healthiest thing for the long term. And the other one is long term, as in it takes longer to develop, but is healthier overall to generate an inbound flow. And, then it's like, all right, well, what do we need to do to kickstart both of those engines?
Yeah, for sure. And sort of pivoting slightly on the subject matter, you mentioned, I believe a few minutes ago, how Web3 would help with the concentration of power of the platforms like Shopify. I think that's what you were mentioning. Can you explain that a little bit more, if you don't mind?
Sure. So, right, crypto, Web3, all these things a lot of it is just new technology, and therefore there are 100 different ways to go about it, think about it, look at it. The way I like all of it. I think it's great. More innovation, the better. I don't like scam stuff, and I don't like the SEC being too crazy. So somewhere in between is healthy. I like payments. I think the traditional interchange 2.9% plus 30 cents. I think that does not survive the decade. It just makes no sense. You don't need the Visa MasterCard network sitting in between just eating up 3%. Actually, eating up 3% and then taking 100 basis points of that from the merchant and bribing the shopper with credit card points to keep it going. Like that, it's a beautiful monopoly they had for a long time, but I don't think that survives the decade. But my favorite aspect of crypto and Web3 is the distribution of ownership and the coordination that ownership can perform. And so, the way we look at that is we're the checkout. We are this central element inside of an e-commerce stack and an e-commerce ecosystem. And what we want to eventually be able to do is give merchants ownership in the checkout based on how much revenue they process through the checkout. It's almost like, imagine Shopify got started and said to merchants early on, if you join, you'll get a piece of Shopify and you'll get a piece of the upside, and you'll be not just our community and our customers, but you'll be owners. So that's like what Web3 kind of promises in potentially replacing these existing platforms. And, when you are running a successful business, but you have a guillotine hanging over your head for a few years, these are the corners that your minds end up going to and reading about, because it's very frustrating to build something that people want. And just because someone has more political power, they can destroy you, even though the customer actually wants it. So I think there are people looking at that in all areas of the internet, from payments to banking to e-commerce to social platforms. And maybe it's in a messy spot right now, but the genie's out of the bottle. And I don't think anything stops this from progressing. And so I look forward to that chaos of upending these existing monstrous platforms that exist on the web today with something that looks different, hopefully.
Yeah, and sort of diving into the technology a little more, how do you think the rise of technology and data has impacted the way that companies approach marketing and advertising in general?
Well, it's taken a hit recently. And it's for these political reasons again, right? So data and tracking, this is what allowed companies to grow so fast recently. And I have an e-commerce lens on this. So I think about brands and direct to consumer and advertising and Facebook and Instagram and so on. The ability to reach an audience in this programmatic way, but have it actually be effective, is like, it was a modern miracle. You can just be like, I'm creating a soap company and I'm just going to go to Facebook and I can just buy customers that are interested in soap. Like that is, amazing. The problem is that it made Facebook so much money and Google so much money that Apple, who owns the operating system and owns the phones, just has to get involved. And so what do? They're like, in the name of privacy, aka destroying our competitors, we're going to release this new update that obfuscates this data and destroys everyone's businesses. But magically, in the next year or two, Apple's going to come out with a privacy-centric advertising network. Ta-da! Right? You got to get that next $1 trillion somewhere. So it moves around with these issues. So technology is there to do a lot more than what is capable. That's our argument in e-commerce, is that the tech is there to do whatever you want as a merchant, but platforms like Shopify and others have a vested interest in not letting you do whatever you want. They want you to do what they want. Yes. But the tech is there to go beyond it. So it's the same thing in advertising. It's the same thing in e-commerce. It's the same thing in payments. The technology exists for you to send me payments and not pay 2.9%. It already exists. So all of these political things, I think, end up fascinating me, not only because it's an us versus them, little guy versus the big evil guys kind of a thing, which is just attractive, but cracking those are the biggest opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And sort of, I guess, diving in a little bit more of that, can you discuss any ways that Rally specifically is staying that ahead of the curve and remaining competitive in obviously this rapidly changing, digital marketing landscape / technology landscape, Web3, all these different things that are happening that are fresh, new, exciting, etc.?
Yeah, I think, in many ways, I end up looking at our product and our company, and I think of it as an inevitable success because it is going where the market is going. The only question is, do we run out of money before the market catches up to us or not? Right. That's really it. So the way we're looking at it is, okay, if technology goes through these cycles of bundling and unbundling and bundling and rebundling and so on, we think what's happening next in e-commerce is more unbundling. Merchants are frustrated. They want more control. They want more freedom. So we are building a product to match that. Here is an e-commerce checkout with all of the features that you're used to that are necessary for selling physical products and other types of products online. And that's kind of where we stop. And we say, you do whatever you want on the front end and you do whatever you want on the back end. And that is an unbundling of an e-commerce platform. Right? An e-commerce platform is a front end and a checkout and a back end and app ecosystem. And what we're really looking at right now is a set of partners to build a new type of an ecosystem. So we kind of hold hands, with some front end solutions and some back end solutions, and we do integrations with everyone. And we say, okay, we're getting ready for when merchants start to value their flexibility higher. And ideally, right, Shopify's price keeps kind of going up. And then enterprise merchants start to want to modernize out of Salesforce, but it's hard to do that. So maybe you do the front end first and then you do the checkout. And so that is where things are going. And so we're positioning ourselves out there in the future. And, and then it's, got to make sure you make enough money to survive and be able to attract investment to be there when the market turns in your direction.
What would you say is the most important thing to attracting that investment? If you can boil it down,
Oof. My experience has been complicated. So when we first raised money, we raised $6 million in seed. And that was in 2020 in a relatively healthy environment. It wasn't frothy, crazy 2021, but people were, there was a lot of money out there in investors' hands. And we were able to raise money off of our track record. Hey, we just built this great company. It ran into a wall with Shopify, but we clearly know what we're doing. There aren't that many teams that have transacted, in the billions of dollars through a checkout. Cool. So that was the bar there. At Series A, can't give too much detail, but we're still in business. The bar changed, and it wasn't necessarily our doing. Our competitors, Fast and Bolt, could not get themselves out of the news. They couldn't shut up on Twitter. They kept attracting all this attention. Then they spectacularly flail and run out of money overnight and shut down the company. And then Bolt gets this thing and lawsuits and their founder leaves. So it went from being in a good, healthy space that everyone wants to fund to all of a sudden, ooh, there must be something wrong with the space. I don't think we want to invest. So one of the things around venture is that you are not really in control of a lot of these factors. And the best thing you can do that you actually have control is just an undeniable set of metrics and momentum. And that is a challenge. That's really hard to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, would you say that was one of the contributing factors to Fast's downfall? A subject we were on a little earlier and you just mentioned that they could not get out of the news. Do you think it was that, what I like to call the bear hug of explosive growth, where they just weren't really ready for it? I know it's a complicated situation.
Right. Every company's got their own nuances, and I happen to know a lot of it just because I'm in the space. So I don't want to get too deep in and bore people with it.
Sure.
But I think what it comes down to is they scaled their company before the product was ready for it. Right. To hire 400 people for a product that's doing like $50K a month in revenue, you kind of lost your mind from a financial responsibility point of view. The truth is people like the product. So we talked to merchants every day that used it and they were like, oh, we missed it because it did X, Y, and Z for us. And we learned from that and built a lot of those features. If they just took a deep breath and listened to the customers and adjusted and grew in a more reasonable way, they'd still be around. So that in that particular case, they just went too crazy on the growth in terms of headcount and expenses before they were ready.
Yeah.
Yep. Like Bolt is a different thing. They're having trouble for other reasons. They almost became too successful at fundraising, and they went from $1 billion valuation to an $11 billion valuation within like a year. And then the market came out, and now their valuation is, a fraction of the last raise. The CEO gets removed or quits or who knows what happened there. And now all of a sudden you've raised too much money at too high a valuation. And now you have to deal with that. So there's a lot of ways that things can go wrong,
If there is anything that you could leave the audience with in terms of maybe someone that is a founder currently and trying to scale their company, like, can you boil something down to like maybe one important characteristic or one thing that they can do to really like level up? You know what I mean?
Ooh, let's think. So first, thanks very much for having me on. It was fun to have a conversation. Hopefully some of my pain translated into some lessons for other people. I think it's really, really hard in today's environment to focus on the right things. It's really, really hard because things capture your attention, right? And anyone out there listening right now who's about to start like an AI content company, I feel you. I don't blame you. It's really hard to not pay attention to all the stuff that's like going around you and what you're consuming. I like people who challenge that in the most extreme ways, like Peter Levels. Okay, if you don't follow him on Twitter, follow him. He is just the perfect encapsulation of only doing the things that matter. Like my guy runs like, $1 million a year business off of like one JavaScript file, like that type of thing. And he'll launch, I think I saw a tweet today. He's like launching something new, basically jobs in the AI industry, and just basically PayPal me $10 if you want a listing. And that is how he starts a business. And if it makes sense, if it doesn't get enough demand, he'll say, sorry, here's a refund for $10. And if it gets enough demand, he goes and builds the product. Like that is like the essence of what we're all actually trying to do. And many of us, myself included, we throw a whole bunch of stuff on top of it. He's really at the core, man. It's great to watch.
He's like an expert MVP producer.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he's like one guy. He makes like, I don't even know. He makes like $2 million a year by himself traveling the world. It's like he's got his priorities right.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. Well, again, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show. And I'm excited to watch Rally grow into whatever you guys become. I feel like you have a really bright future. No problem. Thanks again for listening to another episode of Growth and Beyond. I hope you take something you learned from the conversation and apply it to your business today. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review wherever you're listening or watching and share it with a friend. And please be sure to tune into next week's episode where I interview another top business leader and highlight ways to achieve growth for your business. See you then. If you'd like to level up your customer base and let us help you grow, email me at jacob@lowlandscollective.com.